We are extremely delighted to welcome to this panel discussion today Dr. Mandy Boehnke, Vice President for International Affairs, Academic Qualifications and Diversity at the University of Bremen, and a sociologist with a specific focus on family sociology. Professor Dr. Juliane Filser, biologist and Deputy Director of the Center of Environmental Research and Sustainable Technology, also at the University of Bremen. Dr. Smita Jain, also biologist and Associate Director of Academic and Government Relations at CACTUS Communications, a large science, communication and technology company based in Mumbai. And Professor Dr. Anitha Kurup, a philosopher and educationalist holding a leading position at the National Institute for Advanced Studies in Bengaluru, and who has done extensive research in various fields of education, and specifically on the education of gifted and talented women in STEM disciplines. So a warm welcome to you all, and thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and being here.
Thank you, Ulrike. I guess we can move on to the first round of the panel discussion today. So,
shall I just have a couple of words sort of to the topic,
sure,
if that's okay?
Sure.
We both talked about this in advance, that we are holding this event 1 week ahead of the International Day of International Day for Women and Girls in Science, which was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly only 8 years ago, actually, which I was quite surprised, in 2015, and since then has been held on the 11th of February, so a week from now. And we are particularly delighted, as you just said, Madhura, that so many people registered for this event, which also highlights just how, or underlines how genuine, well, not only the genuine interest for this topic, but also the ongoing importance of the issue. Full and equal access to and participation of women and girls in science is unfortunately still not something self-evident, still not normal. According to figures of the UN, India and Germany both show low figures of female researchers in the field of science, technology, engineering, and maths. The world average lying at only 29%. But also in social sciences, arts and humanities, women face severe obstacles to their careers, leading numbers of women in higher positions within the academia drop sharply after their PhD level. So when we speak of science in this event today, we are obviously looking at a broad understanding of science, acknowledging both the STEM subjects, but also the social sciences, arts and humanities, and obviously acknowledging, and we want to discuss about the differences within. And when we talk about women, we are also obviously aware that women's experience are also traced by issues of class, race, and other social differences, which further impact, obviously, the difficulties that they encounter. And I doubt that we will be able to discuss or fully address all these issues today. But drawing on the experiences and personal experiences, but also their insights and reflections of our distinguished guests today, we hope to discuss both the effects of the lack of gender equality, the reasons behind this, but also what should be done. These are the issues that we want to address today. So with that, Madhura, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks, Ulrike. Thanks for the very, very wonderful introduction to today's topic, and also for introducing the panelists. So in the first round, we'll get a quick overview of what the individual panelist views, as gender discrepancy in sciences. And for this, we ask them to share some examples from their personal journeys itself, to understand how, if there were any particular obstacles that they had to overcome during their journey, who were their role models, and so on. So we'll start with you, Smita. So could you just, take us briefly through your journey so far?
Thanks so much, Madhura, and thank you, Bremen University, and all the others involved for organizing this. This is a topic of importance, and I guess the more we talk about it, more people will become receptive to this particular topic. So, coming to my journey, it's very interesting. I come from Banaras Hindu University, from Banaras, not Banaras, that comes much later. I come from Banaras, grew up in a middle-class family where education was very, very critical. And we got some really good education, both at school, at home, university. But being Banaras, being a very small, and that time it used to be a very, very small city in India, English was never a language that was given any importance. So, and I was always interested in science also because of teachers, my dad being a researcher. The curiosity and the interest in sciences developed much early. So, and then being a good student, the obvious choices were medicine. However, I was very clear that medicine is not something I want to do. So that was a clarity that was there very much. So I decided to get into the basic sciences stream. I came to IIC for an internship. And that I would call a very major milestone in my life. That was a turning point, honestly speaking, because I was very clear that, yes, I want to do a PhD just because the whole place was so vibrant and, the whole learning there for those 2 months were amazing. So I went on to continue my very, stringent, I would say, path of doing my graduation, post-graduation, followed by a PhD. But then I asked this question that, do I really want to continue in academia? And that's where I would say I had very supportive family, my parents, and few other close, teachers who supported the decision of moving out of academia post a PhD, because that was not a norm. Now things are gradually changing, but that point, absolutely, almost everyone would go for a postdoc, and many would go abroad for a postdoc from India. So I started working in biotech sector, worked there for about 3 years, and then that was again bench work. And I realized that bench work is not something I would want to continue all my life. I wanted to explore further. That's when I had taken my second maternity break. A lot of other issues, medical issues happened, and because of which I actually took a 2-long-year break. And I would say that was not a negative thing. Many of us think that, when you take a break from career, it really impacts your career. Luckily, I never thought in that way. I was very clear that, I want to give those 2 years to my kids because both were growing up. And that really helped because I could give solid 2 years. And at the same time, what I also did was I didn't completely lose touch from my subject or from my network. I continued to work, very closely. I continued to learn, I continued to teach. And that was very, very instrumental in keeping me active. But at the same time, I was not worried about my career ahead. Post that, I joined, and that's when I decided to switch gears, join a newly found organization called CCAMP in more scientific administration role. And that was a game changer, honestly speaking. That's where I realized my true potential and my true passion. That, working to empower the research community from the periphery, something that I really, really enjoy. And that's where my, so-called journey into unconventional career path started. I worked at CCAMP for about 5 years. 2016, I joined India Bioscience, which is again a community building program for life science researchers in India. I headed that program for about 5+ years. Again, really, really enjoyed the stint, working with the community, developing a lot of new programs. I had a wonderful team to work with. So, the entire journey was extremely, extremely fulfilling. And then came again a very critical point of deciding whether I should move or I should continue, where I was very comfortable. Indo Science was a place where I was extremely, extremely comfortable. But one book really helped me, honestly speaking, Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. Yeah, that's a beautiful book that really helped me to think and introspect whether I want to continue where I am and where I'm very comfortable, or I should, venture newer paths. And that's when I decided that no, for my growth, for my basically career growth, I should move on. And that's when I joined CACTUS Communications about 1.5 years back. And so honestly, from science, administration, management, communication to more business side of it, the journey has been amazing. Right now, I'm looking at the India business of CACTUS Communications, again, working very, very closely with the research community, something that I have always enjoyed. So yes, that's been my journey in a nutshell, Madhura.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's been very inspiring, Smita. So, and as you already mentioned, you faced, quite a few obstacles. There were quite a few points wherein you had to think critically. For example, when you mentioned about your maternity break, and normally that is the whole thing. Like women are very afraid to take this break because they feel that it's going to maybe somehow hamper their career. And we'll obviously come to more on these issues in the later part of the discussion. So for now, I just want to thank you, for sharing your thoughts and your journey and your main learnings and obstacles so far. And would like to now ask Juliane, Filser, to go through her journey a little and talk about some of the maybe if you had any role models growing up, what was it like? What was your journey like?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madhura. I think my scientific journey was relatively easy overall, but I realized it only now while listening to Smita that I really had role models, important role models. So interestingly, I'm the first one in my entire family who had a higher education beyond gymnasium. But I had a wonderful grandmother who was super interested and curious in learning and knowing things, and who would watch TV with me and quiz shows and the like. And my favorite book that I read as a child was actually a fat not dictionary, I don't know the English word, lexicon. So where you can look at like
encyclopedia, right?
What is it?
Encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Encyclopedia.
Yeah. So I really loved reading that. And also my parents, they as I said, no higher education, but they were still educated. So they had visited several years of the gymnasium, but because of the war and other reasons, they would not finish. So, and then at school, I had another role model, and that was my biology chemistry teacher, and she was simply so inspiring. I had, because of my broad interest, I had no clue after reaching maturity what to study. So I had 3 totally different subjects, and only one of these was biology, to which my teacher had brought me, basically. And so I started it, and because, but the alternative would have been policy or theater sciences, communication science, so really completely different things. But biology was most difficult to get into. And so I said to myself, let's try this first. And then I was just trapped and liked it a lot. And so I went my way quite smoothly, relatively smoothly, but it was a long way. I had long times of studying because in between I had to do many other things. So first, while I was still studying, my mother already died, which was really, she suffered for 7 years. That was really very bad for me because she had been my best friend.
Yeah.
And then I married, and then we would live in a cooperative, and we would renovate an old farmhouse and have a garden and lots of poultry and whatsoever, all those things. So I had really long times of study. And then when I finished, I had got this subject of life in the soil. That was my diploma thesis, and I was self-training in that subject. Because nobody in Munich then knew anything about it. So I had some advisor who told me, well, ask this person, etc. But otherwise, I was just reading a number of books and learning that subject. And then when I had finished, there was a new Institute of Soil Ecology founded in Munich, or near Munich, to be precise. And I immediately asked the director of that new institute, hey, can I please make my PhD thesis in your institute? And he said, what? I have no clue yet on how to structure the institute. So I was quite notorious in asking him every few weeks or months, so what about my PhD position now? And after all, he agreed and said, okay, do your PhD. I have no idea of soil zoology. And I said, well, I learned a lot about it. Yeah, okay, so do it. And so I did it and succeeded, and it was within a very short time. So I had long studies, but a short PhD time. And right after that, my boss had claimed a lot of money for a huge project. And soon I was leader of the soil zoology group, because I had also participated in writing the proposal for that project. And the fun thing was there was some male scientist from India who should have been the senior scientist in soil zoology, but I became his boss, which was quite a problem for him. But that had to be with qualification simply, and also effort. Well, okay. Yeah. And then my good boss left, and of this huge project that he had acquired on agroecosystems, I became the managing director of this huge project, which had 45 different sub-projects.
Wow, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it was a hell of work.
Yeah. So it was like you have a very, dynamic journey. And I loved, for example, how even in your role models, or for example, even with Smita, you started off with some role models that were present in your home, in your family.
Yes. But now comes the break. So I had taken over this position, and of course, in that position, I had quite a lot of power. And then we got a new boss, and this new boss really hated me, and he was mobbing me like hell. So after all, he was close to driving me into a serious depression.
Oh.
Yes, he was not completely sane, I would say nowadays, or that's also what I heard later on, that he was not quite all right. And well, my main strategy was simply work to get out. So I published like hell, and then I finished my habilitation and applied for several professorships. And it was actually in January 2000, I had my habilitation, and I think 10 days later, I got the call to Bremen University.
Oh.
And the fun thing, I was the only female applicant among, I think, 9 or 8. I don't know how many we were. Yeah, and since then I've been here. And I see that now I am the role model because mostly my group is female, and I also see that also compared to male colleagues, that it does make a difference also with students and so on. And I think that's the moment where I should stop to have it not too lengthy.
No, it was interesting to know. So we could just go back briefly to, because you mentioned your learnings, your obstacles so far. So Smita, could you just, give a very brief overview of what are the different learnings that you had in all these different positions? Maybe if we can wrap it up quickly and then move on to the next panelist.
So interesting. Thanks for asking that question. I guess the learnings have been many. The one big learning throughout this journey has been, I would say, that you should know what you do not want to do. What you want to do will come eventually. But if you are very clear, so that clarity is extremely, extremely important. The other is boundaries. And especially this is true for women, that you should know what your boundaries are. Unless you know and you define those boundaries, they just stretch forever. So that's again, I learned much later, but I'm glad I learned. And I guess the other thing is the whole idea of finding a support system around you. Especially in India, I see women want to do everything on their own, especially for their family, for their near and dear. So this creating a support system is something which I feel is extremely, extremely important, and one should not shy away from that. The other big learning has been that, as especially India being a patriarchal society, men and women boys or girls don't grow up alike. And now it's a time that we need to bring in a change. That, we have to bring up our kids, regardless of the gender, in a way that they are equal, and they need to learn those life skills that will help them sail through. And that's something I feel is extremely, extremely important. And setting, I guess I already spoke about setting the boundaries.
Yeah.
So those are some of the key learnings, Madhura. I feel that really makes a difference when you want to grow your career forward.
I think those are such wonderful learnings. We would love you to repeat them at the end of the panel discussion as well, as an advice for aspiring women, who want to, pursue their career. So we'll also repeat them towards the end, and maybe you can add a couple more that you want. We'll move now to Anitha. So Anitha, could you just take us through your journey and maybe, stress a bit more on what were some obstacles, that you overcome, or what was your learning basically when you've worked on so many different programs related to women welfare and development. I would like to before you start, I would just like to remind the audience that we have opened the chat box for question and answers. So anybody who is willing to ask anything can, put in their questions in the chat box. And when we open up the panel discussion for question answer, then we'll allow you to unmute yourself and, see whoever has raised their hands, we'll address them accordingly. But for now, it would be great if you can put in your questions in the chat box. All right, please go on, Anitha.
Thank you, Madhura, and thank you, Bremen University, for hosting this interesting topic in the panel discussion. Let me just when I went back and looked at what perhaps I think would be useful to share, I think the first milestone or the obstacle that I had faced was when I had completed my class 12. My brother was just a year older than me, and my parents were middle-class parents with very limited income. So they had put aside some money for his engineering course, because at that point in time, doing medicine and engineering was the way for students to go if they are bright. But he did not make it to engineering, and my dad
felt a house was extremely important because we did not have a house of our own. And so the money was diverted there. I get into class 12 a year later, and I think I lost the merit seat by 3 marks. And he had to perhaps look at paying something like 10,000, which meant a lot of money to sort of get you a seat in the private engineering college. And he was very clear, and he said that those 3 marks you could have earned if you had really put your effort. It's not that you could not have earned it. So whatever your merit takes you, you will move that stream. And so very disappointed, I joined the undergraduate in physics, chemistry, maths. I was very annoyed, upset. So for the first 2 years, I did not even want to study, but being always a student who has topped in a class, I was very clear that I can't allow that to affect my achievement. And so I did my graduation in physics, chemistry, maths. But after that, I went to do my B.Ed because I actually went to the Mysore University to do my MSc Ed, which was Masters in Science Education. But I think having grown up at home, the hostel was extremely difficult for me to adjust. The hostel culture was extremely very confrontationalist because you had undergraduates who were already in the hostel. And I think I just did not have the skills to sort of maneuver that space. So I came back in a month's time, and the only course that was open was the teacher's course, that is the teacher training course, and I joined the B.Ed, moved on to do my master's and my PhD. So while I was going through this journey, one of the important decisions I had to make was, as traditional families in India, girls had to get married earlier. My father was very clear that if he educated me further, I would become even more independent. So after my master's, he said, yes, we will have to get you married. And I said, no, I want to do my PhD and let us relook at it. And I was not able to negotiate that with him. The only thing I negotiated was, if I get married, they would allow, or they would not obstruct me from doing my PhD, which I was able to negotiate. And so I went on to do my PhD. And during the PhD, the pressures of having family, being an only son, my husband was the only son. So I had to literally clock both my children. The first one, when I had finished my first leg of fieldwork, I clocked her 3 months, 90 days. I was back at work. And I completed my thesis work and then took up my first job at NIAS. I was very particular that I needed a job that gave me the freedom to do what I wanted to do and what I was passionate about. And the National Institute of Advanced Studies provided me that space. But I knew, having entered the job, given organization's function, I knew I could not even look at the second child because I just have picked up a job at the age of 30. And I was really worried whether I would really get a job. So once I did that particular project that I did, the second child I was very clear that I will not have a single child. So the second child was again clocked at the time that I was writing the project report. There again, it was a clear 3 months, 90 days gap till the last day I was in the office. I took off just 90 days and I was back into the office. So I think when I look back into this entire pressure that married women go through in terms of trying to straddle their career and their family, it's important for us to realize, what do you do given the situation that you're in? And the kind of research that I have done with the women in STEM over a decade and a half, I think every single woman that I interviewed had their own ways of negotiating and striking this balance. The entire pattern of balance that women strike has also changed over time. So it's very important for us to capture this dynamic way in which women actually strike their work-life balance, which is fast changing. An important lesson I think that I would want to sort of put on record is the excellent support system that I had, because my mother actually quit her job when I was expecting my first child. And it was she who took the complete responsibility that gave me the cushion to really build my career. If not for her, there is no way that I would have been able to manage the academic pressure. Along with it, I would want to say not only for me, but for many of the women scientists whom I interviewed, having supportive husbands made huge difference. Supportive husbands does not mean that they need to share work. When I talk supporting, it is in that, it's within quotes, which means that he just would allow you to do what you want to do. I think I gained a huge sense of freedom after marriage, where I think I was allowed to explore. And I think that gave you the fillip in terms of actually building your career. Having got into the space, and at NIAS, I started work in the area of gender, and being an interdisciplinary institute, I pushed myself and said, can I bring both the trainings together, my science training and my training in education? And that's how I tried to see whether I could really research in the area of women in STEM. I've really engaged with this area very passionately. And even within the institute, there are several sets of obstacles that you face. I think if you are very vocal, if you're extremely articulate, be sure you'll be shown your place. And I think women should be very strategic about it. You should be able to negotiate your space by recognizing what would not be allowed to happen within the institute, which does not mean that we don't recognize it, but I think building strategies along your career so that you can move ahead and not lose sight of where you want to reach, come what may, I think is a very important lesson that I've heard. So nobody can sort of stop you from what you are doing. And today at the institute, it's always a talk. We don't know what's happening to her life. We would be really interested, how is she managing her family and the career? I don't discuss family within the office space. I just think that people use it to really, to their advantage. And I think I'm not going to give them that piece of information. So let me stop here. I'd be happy to get.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anitha. That was quite stimulating. And it's wonderful that you mentioned about the institutional aspect, because what we are going to discuss with Mandy now is exactly that, being, the vice president of the international affairs of the University of Bremen. What are some of her observations from an institutional perspective? How does the institution deal with these kind of gender discrepancies, or is there something that can be done at an institutional level, or have you faced across any incidents, for example, in your career, which you would like to share, which are relevant to the topic? Mandy.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for having me here. And I think I can refer to a lot of things that were already said. The grandmother's part, but also the supportive husband's part. So these are all important things I also faced. When I was invited for the discussion here, I was thinking how my career was built and what kind of obstacles I actually faced. And then it occurred to me that I, as a younger woman or young early career researcher, I did not specifically think there were any obstacles. I was simply thinking, and I was raised like that, I have good grades, I'm successful in my studies, I'm successful in my work. So what should happen? I mean, it's quite clear that I can follow a career. And then an older female colleague of mine said at some point, you know what? These gender discrepancies, these obstacles do not necessarily appear when you are in your early career. You will face them more when you're in your mid-career. And I think she was right saying that. And then I also looked at the supervisors I had, and as you can guess, the majority were male. which is not a surprise because we have this difference when we look at PhD holders and then when we look at professors and with what kind of endowment they come. So it was clear that there were mainly male, but it was actually the female supervisors who promoted me. So they were coming to me and saying, could you imagine to take this next step?
Right.
And I was actually quite happy for their encouragement, because I think from talks with other women as well, I have the feeling sometimes maybe we as women might need a little bit more of encouragement to, go on with and climb up the career ladder, which is hard enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would leave it at that, and I think we would talk about the differences that I already described when you look at PhD holders, or the portion of women and men for students, and then PhD holders, and further on with professors in a next round.
Right. So with this, I would like to end this first round, and I would like to thank all the panelists for sharing such, insightful views. And I'm pretty sure that I'm talking for at least 95% of the women attendees here, that they felt very seen at the when you were talking this, or about your journeys, or about your role models, or about the inspiration. I feel that they can resonate 100% with what you said. So with this, we would like to move on to the next round, which will be led by Ulrike. And there we will discuss more about, go more in depth about what is the status quo about, this gender discrepancy, and, how to tackle that. So Ulrike, over to you again.
Yes, thank you ever so much. I mean, we've already been hinting at so many crucial issues. This question about the support network, the private support network, but also the academic networks that also Mandy was just mentioning, the role models. We've already touched on many of the issues, actually. Also the question of the compatibility of family and career obviously has already been stated from your personal stories. So this is already great. I was just, I think a couple of things sort of just to bring the whole discussion to another level as well. I was wondering, Anita, I would love to start with you, because you've been doing specific research in this field. And I was sort of wondering whether we could once more, just for this panel and this event today, sort of recap. I mean, where are the roots of the issue around access to academic education, or this access to science? Does it start in the childhood? Where is it just a reflection of society, or is there something specific to academia? I know that's a massive topic, but where do you see sort of important points that we have to highlight when we're talking about this gender inequality in academia?
See, one of the points that I want to really highlight when you're looking at the question of gender and science, particularly in India, because the research within the area of gender hardly speaks to women in the science. There have been two verticals that has been growing within India, and I think that has been one of the huge problems we have had when you compare to some of the Western countries. The second problem that we had also is the research on gender and science in India broadly was constructed within the framework of societal framework in a way to try and say that we are not able to get women into the STEM disciplines simply because society has not allowed women to do it. So the large part of the blame and a large part of the research pointed out to personal factors and societal factors. It is this research that I did in 2010 with the Indian Academy of Science, which perhaps was the first and perhaps the only research currently in India, which was large scale, a national study where we covered over 561 women scientists. and we covered about 161 men scientists. And this particular project was conceived by the scientists and the social scientists, executed by the social scientists to ensure confidentiality to the women scientists. So it was done through NIAS, and the results were again discussed so that the language of the report reflected both the groups that was involved in terms of the research. So that study basically tried to say that we are hitting a wall if we only use framework that looked at societal obstacles and personal obstacles, and institutions have a responsibility to respond to the entry of women who were late entrants into the institutional or organizational space. The problem of science organizations is historically they have been spaces occupied by men, and more importantly, I would want to underline, occupied by men who had the luxury of stay-home wives. So that was the way that the organizational space was actually constructed. Into that space, today we have women who walk in with responsibilities of family, and we have young men walking in who are also pressurized to take responsibility of the family. So the restructuring of that space that has been fairly entrenched is the biggest obstacle that I would see as a problem of women in STEM in India. And I think that is extremely important for us to sort of flag off upfront.
Yeah, thank you ever so much. I was actually, Juliane has already put her hand up because I was immediately thinking of our conversation earlier before this event. And obviously you're also in biology, and I remember us talking about the specificities even within your discipline. So not just, so I've also in my research to this event, I even read that the UN uses the word segregated, even, you know, kind of different disciplines being segregated. So would you say your discipline, your field, Juliane, is a male-dominated field still? I mean, you're a role model already in your field, but also within the field. I remember us talking about there sort of being different sort of fields within or different areas, different scientific interests that are sort of seem to have some kind of gendered background to them. What do you have to say?
Yeah, well, a number of things. So first of all, directly to your question, of course, we still have a gender issue also in biology. It's the typical progress upward the career ladder. So the students are dominated by females still. So we have over 50% female students, but among the professors, when I started, there were 4% female professors in biology. Now it is, I think we have achieved 20% by now. That's already a huge progress. And I should say, when I started, I thought that's all this crap. I don't want to hear about gender issues. So it's just scientific qualification, etc. And I don't care. I have no problems to compete with men. So I just go there and do my job. And let's leave those feminist crap behind or something like that. But the more I advanced in my career, the more I got aware of all those male densely intertwined networks where it is so difficult to get inside. And right inside biology, look at, if you look at the research landscape in biology, in ecology in Germany, we have 3 so-called biodiversity exploratories, which have been funded by the FG for, I think, since 2008 or whenever that started. There's a huge amount of money was pumped into these exploratories. They have ever since been dominated by men, of course, and led by men. So this is the majority of project leaders. And I see it also now with every professorship where we want to employ, we desperately seek for female applicants. but not even among the applicants. It's already there. It is hard. It is really, really hard to find them, although there are brilliant women. And sure, now that we have become aware of that, we definitely we are trying to push them and tell them where the obstacles are, etc. I realized that I started organizing our seminars in such a way that I decided I will only, wherever possible, I will only invite female researchers or so. But it's not easy to find them. And if so, no, I can't because my kids at the old story. So that's one of the things directly to your question. But I had raised my hand because of the other question concerning the roots of a scientific career. And I am deeply convinced, so for me it's 100% true, that the roots are in the childhood. It's so important what your parents are doing in early childhood. In my case, I spoke already about the interest that was stimulated by my grandmother, etc. But it was also my parents. I liked playing with dolls, yes. But my father gave me a toolbox at the age of 8 or 10 years, and I loved it. I loved repairing radios and such things. And the other thing that my parents did, and where they really did a great job, I think they gave me a lot of confidence very early, and they educated me to independence. When I was 3 or 4 years old only, I was sent alone to go shopping. I had a little purse this size, so it was really tiny, and I had something like 50 pfennige then, and I was allowed to purchase some bread or so. And they trusted me and said, yes, do it. And they told me also, if you have trouble at school, if there is a bad boy hitting you, just hit back, you are strong. And so I did. So that was so utterly important. And that's what I wanted to put out.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, sort of the gendered nature, or the gender, how we are brought up into certain gendered understandings of ourselves and what we can do, and even this aspect of self-confidence is that you're mentioning is in fact something that is obviously originates already in the childhood and so on. And then it's sort of the question which kind of subjects we choose. I think that's also been mentioned here is obviously also a question of how we are brought up and what we are seen as topics that we can choose as things we want to do, as career paths that we can imagine for ourselves. So thank you very much for that. I was also wondering on this point of sort of the gendered tasks, I sort of mentioned, I remember you saying, Juliane, that even the topics within biology, certain subjects that are more practice orientated, and in the field of sustainability, we were talking about that, you mentioned that they in fact, interestingly, are rather subjects within biology or within this that women choose, while others that are, correct me if I'm wrong, that are more theory orientated still are areas where that are more male dominated. So this is something that the fine-tuned sort of gender biases within the academia too. And that I wanted to come to Smita on this point, if that's okay. And I'll come back to Mandy in a minute after that. But I was wondering, because I've done some reading about these specific obstacles within the academia, and I have the impression that it's not just the major obstacles of access to the academia, but that in fact, during the whole career path, there are obviously some tasks that have to be done. And within these tasks, certain questions such as publications and so on, I count more obviously in the career path, while there are a lot of topics that we do, for example, supervising students and so on in this whole field. And I was wondering whether you also observe a gendered aspect within these different tasks when we've already received or already in academia. I think you also mentioned that you moved into science administration more and this kind of field. So I'm wondering, was there something behind this? Were you was it a pure interest, or also is there a step about this whole administrative work, which is very important work, but is then seen as a side work to other academic work? What do you say?
I guess thanks for asking that question. I guess that's very, very important and critical issue to be discussed. Many of the women, younger colleagues have come and asked this question that I want to take up a lighter role, because they are trying to balance both family and work. And they have come and asked this question, and we have discussed this numerous times, that I want to take up something light. Should I move into science administration, science communication, journalism, or any other such thing? And my answer has always been that if you want to build a happy, successful, content career, nothing is easy. Nothing comes easy. You have to put in that extra hard work, be it academic or non-academic career path, because without that hard work, things are not going to materialize and you will never find that fulfillment. So I really don't see a reason why some career options are considered easier. And that's why many of the women feel that, we should be kind of gravitating towards that and leave academia. I honestly feel that it should be based on your interest and your skill sets, that what your interests are, what your skill sets are, what your value systems are. Basis that is what a career decision should be made, not considering any particular path easy, and that's why maybe it's for women. Because I've seen many struggling even after leaving academia. So I would say, I guess Juliane made that point, that it also depends how we have been brought up from our childhood. It actually it has a very, very deep connection to that if you have been grown up as an independent child who's confident of his or her own tasks and is responsible to take his or her life ahead, I really don't think that these issues matter. You can very easily overcome it and kind of create your own niche and move ahead. In today's world, you see so many women in power at higher positions. And I would say last few decades, a lot has changed, at least in India. If you look today, and just this morning, I saw this picture, an amazing picture. We have a woman president right now, Srimati Draupadi Murmu, who's come from such humble backgrounds. She was a clerk in one of the government departments in a state, and today she holds a position, the highest position in the country, of being a president, right? She had such terrible personal losses in her life, but regardless of that, when you see her standing at that podium, at the top, at the helm, you feel that, any woman can do it. It just doesn't matter. Yeah. So
a call to trust in yourself despite the obstacles that just Anita was also pointing out, the more institutional and structural difficulties that we're faced with. Great. Thank you so much for that. Nevertheless, I think there's also this point about sort of that we've talking about the family career compatibility, the question of whether in Germany it's a great debate about how transparent are these discussions about how to plan your career. I realize, I'm sorry, there's background noise. I hope it's not too disturbing. Yeah, you were also mentioning yourself that sort of the question when you plan to have children even comes into your own plans. So obviously there is something to take into consideration there. So I'd pass that back to Mandy, also with the maybe to the aspect of sort of social sciences there again, sort of because we've been talking about biology and the STEM subjects more. So in social sciences, we do have, it's still a broad category, obviously, philosophy, arts, humanities, and social sciences. There's a difference there. Maybe could you say a couple of words to that, and then again to the question of these career developments, maybe.
Okay, I try. So social sciences, what is so special about it? What is maybe different, or what is different, that yes, you have a majority of women studying social sciences, but still, if you then look at the professorships taken, this is still the majority male, even though, and I think Juliane mentioned that earlier, a lot has happened over the last years, and we are about 45% females professors in the field. But then if you talk to the professors, they would also claim, yeah, but still it's not an equal proportion. And that means that the committees that have to be filled, and our university works with a lot of committees, this is then the representation of the female professors. This is then done by a minority, so to speak, and then they engage more in that committee work, and that is less time for publications. And there, this is probably a disadvantage, you could say, even stronger in fields where the proportion of male and female is more unequal. And then I can also refer to what you have said, when it comes to children. We shouldn't forget that about 30% of the academic women in Germany are childless. And that often also comes, sometimes this is a decision that was taken earlier on, sometimes this is sacrificed due to career. So that is something you have to keep in mind, that it's not always possible for everyone to really combine that kind of living. And that, on the other hand, could also be a reason why women may leave the field, because we have about 45-50% of women in the field doing a PhD, even more. But then if you look at professors, this percentage is less. And then you could ask yourself, where are these women? Where did they go to? And then maybe they went out and looked for more secure jobs with more transparent career paths. That I could imagine that they may have seen in the administration field. It doesn't mean that this is always easier, no, but the percentage of permanent contracts is much higher.
Perfect. Yes, thank you ever so much. I think that was a great sort of summary of the aspects that all go into this topic. So I think we could open up to the audience also. I have no doubt that you also have comments, but also questions that will further deepen our debate. We still have half an hour for this, and we'll try to tie this discussion into the discussion on what to do. We've already got some advice for the individuals and younger scholars, but also maybe there are also institutional things that have to be done and so on. So we'll tie this discussion into the question, what should be done? Yes, feel free to put your hands up, or also write your questions into the chat. We'll take them on board. And I'll pass over to Madhura. You're going to moderate this part now.
Yes, that's right. So we have 2 hands raised already, but before we go that, I'll just take one quick question from the chat because I think we have one only. So this is from Gayatri. She wants to ask, so, in recent times, do you observe that women are growing and supported better in academia? Or do you see them supported better in careers, at the periphery of science, like counseling, entrepreneurship, mentorship, science writing? So when it comes to, having a support system, or I would maybe paraphrase this question in a way that, is it easier for women to have a support system when they are pursuing a career in academia, or maybe towards the periphery of science? I think I've phrased it correctly, Gayatri. If not, you can just unmute yourself and ask the question. I would say this ties in with what Smita just mentioned, that nothing comes easy. So no matter what path you choose, you are going to need to have that kind of support system to, go ahead. But if you or if someone else can, add on to this, specifically, if you could talk about how some specific tasks or responsibilities are perceived to be better handled by males than females, and that's why females don't usually take up these responsibilities. So if you could go on.
Madhura, I would say those are 2 different questions. I'll go with the first one first. And honestly, I don't see that there is much of a difference. It all depends on the individual organization. I would say many of the corporates, and I know a lot of friends who work in corporate sector, find it extremely difficult because they don't have support system. I also know of the organization, and that's true for the one where I am currently, or even for that matter, India Bioscience, where I was earlier, or even CCAMP. These organizations have been, and they are at the periphery of academia, or let's say corporate, and they've been extremely, extremely supportive. When I started my job at CCAMP, they allowed me to work part-time because I was very clear that I have 2 small kids and I want to, work part-time. And they were very clear. When we were moving from Bangalore to Noida, because my husband moved, I had in fact put down my papers, and thanks to my, bosses there, who were both males, that they said that, don't put in your papers. You just continue working from home even when you move to Noida. So they were extremely, extremely supportive. And I would say that such a support system really helps you to continue working, and contribute towards the growth of the organization. At India Bioscience, which was mostly a women-led, organization, all were women, but we had some policies in place which were extremely, extremely critical. We could work in hours which were suitable for us. So I would go in early and come back a little early, again, because I had timed it with my, kids' school times. And that helps.
Right.
Currently, in the current organization, I would say, again, it's very, very supportive of women who have kids, and for that matter, anyone and everyone in the organization, regardless of the gender. So these are things I would say are very difficult to differentiate whether this is more in academia or less in corporate. It all depends on the individual policies of the organization that has been set in. And I would say with more and more women coming into leadership positions, things would change, gradually change, and must change if they have not so far.
Right. That's wonderful. So as you said, the second question, we'll probably come to it at a later point if we have the time. So we have 3 hands raised. Juliane already has a hand raised, so please go on, Juliane. Yeah. Or was it from before?
I think Soumya
and
me, right?
Yes. So maybe Soumya, you can start. You can unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Thanks very much. I am really impressed and inspired by all the participants from India as well as Germany. I myself have recently started at University of Bremen. I originate from India, and I am lucky to be in a project that is dealing with internationalization and gender at the Equal Opportunity Office. So I'm glad that I'm part of this discussion because I can really get a lot of input. Thank you very much. I must say, for the organizers as well as presenters. For me, the discussion is very valuable, but on the other hand, raises a very critical question for me as to whether we are addressing the women and their experiences as individuals or as a group that has an impact from an existing structure. So as I've read recently in papers, science is clearly fed by a patriarchal, white, masculine society. So science in itself as an academy, as a structure, has been created by a certain majority of people. Therefore, women are an unusual norm to be entering into science or academy. And that has been proven by all your life experiences as well. And then I'm wondering whether we are here addressing only the terms without disregarding any of your experiences. I share a lot of those experiences myself. Whether, as in a recent study that addressed the Humboldt Foundation, that is providing a lot of scholarships to international female scientists as well. And there they mentioned we have to move away from, in order to counteract the barriers, we have to move away from addressing fixing the women rather than move towards fixing the system, which in my perspective is probably the bigger discussion, because we as women, as the minority, are functioning in a system that is not designed for us and that does not expect us to fit in because we are not the norm, you know. And then I'm wondering, we as women, including myself, when we talk about, for example, work-life balance, automatically my unconscious biases, I think of a woman who has to do the balance. Why isn't that men are addressed at the same spectrum of a work-life balance? And why is it that we as academics have to become the extra Leistung, in German you say extra, you know, we have to put in extra work so that we are able to achieve that balance. Right. So I'm wondering, are we here again talking about fixing ourselves, our networks, and, you know, creating those networks in which we already exist in order to get ahead, to match actually an expectation which was to begin with not set by us? So that's just a comment and also reflection on the report that I've recently read, and I was wondering actually if that can be discussed. Thanks.
Oh, that's quite interesting. I think Smita already has some thoughts on this, so I'll just give it to her. Smita.
I know I won't go for long, but again, this was told to me by a male mentor. And I would very specifically say that because many a times, you know, we kind of compartmentalize ourselves, and I'm not just talking about women, but any gender, into these separate compartments and, you know, see problems differently. But that one piece of advice was very, very critical and has helped me immensely is, you know, one was, if you want a change, be the change. And second was, just challenge the system. Things will change. So I guess that's very critical. Anitha definitely made this very clear. And that's true that, you know, we are working in a system which was not originally created for women. But with time, lot has changed, lot is changing. And I agree, lot needs to change. And to quite a large extent, I feel we can only bring in this change.
Yeah.
So that's one point I just wanted to add.
That's wonderful, and good that both Anitha and Mandy have raised their hands, because I was going to come to them next, you know, from a structural perspective. So Mandy, could you go first and, you know, address some of the issues that she mentioned?
Okay, I can try. I was actually, I also wanted to thank Samia for the points she raised. Actually, this is always when you are sitting in these discussions, whether you're talking from an individual perspective or a structural perspective, you raise the question of whether we talk about women as individuals or groups. Of course, we are sitting here as individuals and we're asked for our life stories. So in that sense, it is an individual perspective. But I also understood our discussion as a more structural discussion, where we would say, yes, the system needs change, and therefore, maybe with the women at leadership positions, I think Smita said that, the system is going to change. So I also understood our discussion as facing women as a group, and this was done over the last decades, I would say, by the various waves of feminism and the various approaches of feminism. And they always have seen women as groups. And they have also been successful in with many rights we have nowadays. And we shouldn't forget that it is still a rather young history where women can actually go to university. In Germany, that only was possible around 1909 or 10 or something like that. So it's still quite young. But I understood our discussion as both women as individuals and as groups. So I think both happened in here. And was there another point you wanted me to answer to, Madhura?
No, that's that you answered it. So in fact, to summarize what Soumya and all of you just said, it's basically both. It's an individual change, and then that is going to lead to a systemic change, is what I would say. And here I would like to, replace the word that Soumya, if you allow me to, the fix, instead of fixing, I would say evolving would be a better word, because all of us are evolving, whether it's individuals, we are evolving our thought, growing. If women are building trust in themselves, building that confidence in themselves. So I would just use the term, that word for both, for systems as well as individuals. And I think now Dr. Pratibha Chaturvedi has a question. So she has been raising her hand for quite some time now. So ma'am, please go on.
Yeah, thank you, Madhura. Actually, when I was completed my PhD, I got married, and after 15 years of gap, I have started work related to biotechnology and all, and that was my part-time job. And after 5 years of part-time job, I have some searching, and also I have started work as a PDF postdoctorate fellow in Hefkin Institute, Mumbai. And meanwhile, I have just put my project in a Department of Science and Technology for women scientists job, because in Indian Department of Science and Technology have a policy, if a woman have a career break, they can start again. So I have just applied for that, and after a meeting before some committee member, I awarded for that particular project that was related to plant biotechnology and biochemistry. So that I have started in Hefkin Institute, Mumbai. And in between, I have also given some training to the students, that are B.Tech students, BSc students for plant tissue culture technique. And in between that, and I have given some small project for that. And I have just guided that, and they completed the work, and I written the paper. And in between the whole journey, that was around 5 to 6 years in Hefkin, 6 years in Hefkin Institute, I have published 34 research papers and 7 books.
That sounds wonderful.
For related to my plant tissue culture experiments and some virological experiments, some animal studies that I have just gone through with the help of some PhD students that were working in the Healthcare Institute. So after that, I started my journey, and right now I have around 18 years of research experience, and right now I'm working as a consultant traditional medicine in Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Delhi. So this is my journey.
Nice. Wonderful,
so
wonderful. You have like a specific question for the panelists?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that don't give up.
Yeah.
For any of the women, if you want to do anything, you can do. That is my just views only, not question.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks a lot for sharing your views, Dr. Chaturvedi. We'll move on to the next question, which is from Nust. I do not know how to pronounce your name.
Okay, it's me. It's me. So it's really not a question. It's rather a comment.
Mm-hmm.
So just briefly to introduce myself, I'm a biologist. I'm a director at the Max Planck Institute in Dresden. So I'm working in the field of developmental biology and genetics. And I was very happy to hear the comment of, I don't know how to pronounce, Sumia Pent on the system. Huh? Somnia. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That the system, and this is something that also makes me think since quite some time, because the system we are working in and the society overall has been generated by men, and they have generated it according to their needs and to their comfort. And so I always would like to have, let's say, an experiment so that women design the system how it should be. What would be different? What would be the same? And the only, let's say, the only thing that should be kept in mind, it should be successful also in terms of science, in terms of scientific progress. Right. So, and I have not come up with a solution, but perhaps it may be a good idea to think about it. The other point I wanted to make, so I'm in the Max Planck Society since 2007, and when I joined the biomedical section, there were something like 2 women of, I don't know, 80 directors. And then there was an attempt, and this was initiated by a man, to have, it was called the program 20 by 2020, which means 20% female directors in the year 2020. And this, we met this, although then 2 women retired, and then of course this kind of moves the balance. But I think what I learned from this, we also have to find colleagues, male colleagues, which are thinking in the same direction and which help us to push these programs through, because there are quite a few out there. So this is something I learned, and also the Max Planck Society very recently initiated a program to recruit women at a younger age into a, let's say, a pre-director status. I will not explain all the details, but if you're interested, I can write it to you later on. So which allowed, because it was also said that very often women, when they are in the position to be recruited to, let's say, a professorship or directorship, they have set up their life. They have good positions. They don't want to move, right? Mm. So, and this is another program which also has been pushed then, perhaps initiated by some women in the society, but then also supported by men. And I think this is something we also have to keep in mind, not always, let's say, to complain how difficult it is for women. Yes, there are obstacles, but I think there are also obstacles for men. And as Smita said, and thanks Smita for inviting me to this discussion, I think we have to fight against these obstacles, both men and women. So, and I think that's perhaps something we should also think about it in the future. Thank you.
I think that was a very wonderful point you mentioned about, taking along your male colleagues, because in all this discussion, we are forgetting that, we're all together in this. Mm-hmm. It's not man versus women that we are talking about here. It's about everyone raising to the same level, more or less. So if there are men who believe in the cause and who are going to help you, then I think it's always good to get their help to, you know, move ahead. So I think that's a wonderful point you raised, and I want to thank you for that. We have 2 hands raised from the panelists, but before that, I think there was 1 hand raised from Ellen. Akash, I don't know if you want to talk because she raised her hand down. If you don't want to, then I can maybe hand it over to Anitha to say something.
You can hand over. Thank you.
All right.
I just wanted to come back to that larger question that Soumya raised, which I think is an important question. And it's important for us to see that you don't have an either or situation. You just need to do both. We need to work towards getting the system to change. We cannot expect the change to happen from the system. And we should also be seeing how do we strategize to get the system to respond. That is point number 1. The second point of talking of women as an individual and as a group, research within this area of women in STEM in India, which is large scale. I've done 2 large scale studies, which I really want to say that there is a grave attempt of people trying to homogenize women's experience, particularly in the STEM discipline, which is problematic, which does not take away the fact that we need to address some of these issues as a group of women. But what is my experience is not the experience of the women, of the other women scientists. And it's important to see the patterns that sort of emerge and for us to understand how these patterns happen. So ideally, I think women has to work on all fronts and not really expect changes from the front, whether it is the family or the organization, because nothing is given to you. You have to assert and take it. It is your right. And if you don't use that framework, though people are not going to sit down and hand it over to you, they just won't do it.
Maybe I could just sort of add to that with one eye on the time. We've got another 4 minutes to the end of this session, and I really enjoy the emphasis that is put on these 2 dimensions. Obviously, the change, the institutional and structural change that has to come, and the strength and where this has to come from, and the individual efforts that have to go into this. I would just sort of ask for the others that still have their hands up, maybe to also make suggestions. I understood Professor Knust also in this sort of sense. What is could there be something like a feminist academia, or whether you like the word feminist or not, we can call it, or there's a different style of academia that can sort of promote an equality for all in this kind of sense. What could that be? And that's what my question would be now for the final sort of question. Maybe you could also make suggestions. What are specific the structural things that have to change, or institutional things that have to change? I think Juliane, you had your hand up. If you would like to add to that.
Yeah, that's exactly why I had raised my hand half an hour ago, because it was also mentioned in the chat that there was such a huge difference in the US compared to Germany. And I think we do have to change the institutions as such in order to do something also for women. It was also mentioned that women tend to take over larger or more roles in boards, etc. If this is the case, we professors, at least, we overall have way too much administrative work here. And that's the main difference, for instance, compared to the US, because there's much more money in the system and all the administrative stuff is done by others. And if we have an imbalance of more women doing administrative stuff, that would be one possibility to solve this problem. So it's more an institutional than a male-female thing. But I would also like to mention that in my faculty, we do not have this imbalance, but a lot of supportive men.
That's wonderful. So I think we are, let's say we are probably towards the end. We could take something from Mandy. Please go on.
Yes, that would be wonderful. I like the term allyship, just where you were saying. So this, what form of allyship is there between men and women? Yeah, Juliane said. But Mandy, maybe you want to give some final words.
Yeah, you asked for what can be done, right? And I also liked the suggestions that were made also by Elisabeth Nust on take in men. This is what I always also repeat and say it cannot be done without them. And then there was also a question in the chat. Well, it is not an automatism that if women are in the leadership, then they would actually do something for women. That is also clear. But I think we need to work on several fields, several areas. And that is, yes, change structures. That could also mean that if you give, for example, more tenure track positions, where I started earlier on with saying, okay, maybe women leave more because they do not see a perspective. And so that could be one. Then you could say, oh, and those are reserved in parity. So half of them is given to men, half of them is given to women. Then you could further work on empowering women. That is already done with a lot of mentoring programs. We also have that at University of Bremen. I'm sure this exists in other places as well. And then what I also saw that it helps quite a bit if you make women more visible, if you actually encourage them to go into leadership positions. They might sometimes be afraid because visibility also comes sometimes with criticism, and in these times this is sometimes a very harsh criticism. And of course you spend a lot of time in those positions. So what you could do is also work on incentives and compensation. So have a fund, for example, that you can spend on whatever you want. It could be your own coaching, but it could also be that you hire someone who's builds the bridge actually to your academia. So all kinds of things. So incentives I'm thinking of. And then what we also always need is to actually do an evaluation of all these measures we have and see which kind of process is done. And this is not ideas I only have, but this is basically also a summary with the National Academy of Science in Germany, Leopoldina, has come up with. But I totally agree with that. And I see a lot of these things we have already, but we can, of course, do more and continue with those measures. That's all from my side.
That's wonderful. I think this topic is so vast that 90 minutes is not enough. Probably we need to do a part 2 of this sometime in the future. Let's see. But for now, I think we would like to conclude this discussion, and to summarize very briefly, what we've learned so far is, we have to, as all the panelists stressed, and as Soumya also raised a very important point, we need to make both changes. There has to be an individualistic change, and there has to be a systemic change. And it's all about how you bring these two changes together, how they are synergistic in order to change the picture of, gender discrepancy. So, and I think, the questions keep coming. A lot of engaging discussion has actually happened in the chat, I feel. I wish there was some way that we can share it with, everyone. But for now, I think we would like to end with a lot of learnings that we have, firstly, to have trust in ourselves, then to evolve ourselves, to, have that faith. As I realized, as I was thinking, how to summarize, it's very hard for me because the learnings are, on some level, they're very similar. But on the other hand, because India and Germany are systemically very different, it's, you know, it's very hard to have one common learning for everyone. So I hope that all the attendees here have taken in everything that resonates with them on a personal level, and I'm pretty sure that it has. With that, I would like to, you know, thank all. Thanks, Smita. Courage, confidence, and clarity. That's true. With that, I would like to thank all the panelists, all the attendees, and everyone for being a part of this very engaging discussion. I'm pretty sure we'll have to host a part 2 to accommodate all the other questions that have come up. And as far as the upcoming events of the Alumni Association go, please feel free to visit the website, and all the Indian attendees here, if you have been associated with the University of Bremen in some way or the other, feel free to inquire about joining the India chapter. So yeah, that's all from my side. Ulrike, would you want to add a few words?
It's wonderful. Just thanks from my side, and I wish you all a good evening wherever you might be right now.